Welcome back, everyone, to the second episode of Blue Collar, White Collar, with me, Kieran, and my co-host, Nicholas Wheeler Hughes. Say hi to everyone, Nick.
What's up, everybody? Happy to be here. The white collar makes me sound so bougie. We're just two friends with different views who are having a discussion, but I think it's a catchy title.
White collar's not necessarily bougie. Which is a word that I only recently learned after my stepmother started using it around me, which is kind of strange. But today we're going to be talking about the Democratic Party in general, our views on them, their current platform, the current running candidate that they have. And we're going to send it over to Nick to start this out because he's the one that actually supports them. So, Nick, give us some thoughts.
Damn straight I support them. And I think that it's not even close. Okay, well, let me start this way. At the beginning of this election cycle, it seemed pretty clear that we were Joe Biden. The same candidates from 2020, both of whom were very unpopular, and a lot of them were disappointed by the choices that were being offered to them. That's why, for a time RFK was doing well, third-party candidates doing well, because these two candidates were so fundamentally different. Then the debate happened, the first debate where Biden just totally dropped the ball. His age, his inability to put coherence together really shone the way that it hadn't before. And after that, the Democratic Party went into a panic, right? And that was such an interesting span of weeks, because I think that the question that the Democratic Party was grappling with in that span of weeks is, are we a party that is based around one person in the way that the Republican Party is, right? Very much a personality cult of Donald Trump. Are we a party that exists basically just to elect and re-elect? And that question was mulled over by Democratic elected officials, Democratic voters, and ultimately the Democrats do that prove they're a party in the way that the Republicans are not a party. It's that they were to go beyond Joe Biden. They were able to make the hard decision, because it was a very hard decision, right? It's never been done before, where a candidate who actually received all the delegates, right? They went through that whole process. They were going to officially nominate Biden because he had all the delegates. And instead they did something that took a lot of courage, I think, a lot of political courage. They replaced him. Joe Biden obviously is not about that. I suspect that to this day he thinks he could have won. But that's a man who's spent 50 years trying to be president, right? So the Democratic Party, I think, is the only major party in America that remains where its focus is on actually delivering for people, as opposed to just putting one person and keeping one person in power in the way that I feel the Republicans have become.
Yeah, there's some of that I definitely agree with. The Republicans are definitely a cult of personality, but we're going to try to shy from talking about them too much, because this is the Democratic. Next month we're going to be talking about the Republicans, mainly about Donald Trump, probably, because he's the major figurehead of that party. But I would say that in a way, Democrats are a cult of personality. They were for a few years around Obama, and he's kind of still the guy. Like, if he could run again, he would, and he would win. If he says something, it's pretty much that's the way that things are with the party. There's certain things that he's less in line with what Kamala's doing these days. She seems to be a bit more pro-union than he is, which I do like. But he's definitely the guy on their side. Wouldn't you agree?
No. Someone, I don't know if I said this last time, I don't think so. Someone recently described the two conventions Thanos versus the Avengers, where the whole Republican convention was all about Trump, right? And everyone's just talking about Trump, and you don't really have any well-known figures, no Republicans who were prominent in the Republican Party in 2012, right, were around. It's like just Donald Trump's party, where he's become not just the figurehead, but inseparable from the Republican Party itself, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And to people who share my views, see him as the big bad guy, right? Whereas the Democrats brought out everybody, right? They had, I agree with you that Obama's probably the most important,
to take your analogy, he's the Tony Stark.
He's kind of Tony Stark, exactly. But you had all the other Avengers come out, right? You had Michelle Obama, who is, arguably nearly as big as Obama himself, as Barack himself, I should say. But you had the Clintons speak, you had Tim Walz speak. Biden obviously spoke on the first night. All these popular senators and congressmen and women were all taking the stage one at a time. Everyone coming out for this one cause, which was to elect Kamala Harris, and it just felt as though you're right that Obama is probably the number one, but he is number one of many. Tony Stark is not the only Avenger. To the analogy, and I think that that's what a party should be, is made up of many different leaders, right? Not one person. Obviously, Kamala Harris is the leader of the Democratic Party, but she is not singularly in control of it in the way that Trump is in control of the Republican Party.
Oh yeah, I mean he can swing the opinions of Republicans like on a dime. I don't know.
There is no longer a Republican Party without Trump. Right? There is a Democratic Party after Joe Biden. We've seen it. We just saw it. And there's a Republican Party beyond Harris.
Yeah, but I think the way that the sway that Obama has is quite intense. I mean, it's because of the phone calls that he made that Joe Biden got the nomination in 2020. If it hadn't been for the phone calls that he made, then there would have been much more contention. Your Pete Buttigieg's, your Amy Klobuchar's would have been much less likely to drop out when they did and support him, and then Bernie Sanders probably would have edged out the victory. So one of my major problems with the Democratic Party is really I don't feel they're very democratic. It's right in their name, and they seem to be failing at it consistently. In 2016, they used superdelegates to steal the nomination from Bernie Sanders. That was his, and they stole it from him because the establishment thought it was Hillary Clinton's time. Then in 2020, they did the same thing in a different way, where they organized it so that Bernie would have eked out that victory. It would have been less close, in my opinion, than against Hillary Clinton, because there was more people behind, more people in the running to take up percentages. And then this most recent time, in my opinion, was just the most disgusting display of what I'm talking about. They knew that their president was not capable of doing it. I refuse to believe that they did not see what was happening with their president, and they still chose to not have a actual democratic process to replace him. And then in the last minute, when the emperor's clothes were finally revealed to not actually be existing, they swapped him in with the candidate that was the establishment pick from 2020. It was 2019 back then. When she was running in 2019, all the major newspapers all thought that she was the choice. And she flailed and dropped out before even a single vote was cast. And then he chose her as vice president. And then, when it was time for him to drop out, they slid her in a completely anti-democratic process, in my opinion. Is she more popular than him? Absolutely. Mostly because no one wants a president who's completely senile. But she really did not have a genuine backing until he dropped out. Then everyone was so relieved to have someone with a functioning brain, at least, more than 80% of the time, that they just jumped on the bandwagon of Kamala Harris. I believe they could have done that with anyone that had a functioning central nervous system. Like if anyone who was intelligent enough to step up to the plate, I think people would have reacted in the same way and jumped on board. So I think it's just disgusting what they've been doing in the past several years. Are they democratic in that they typically lean towards the policies that are more popular with the people? Sure, but they're subverting democracy in many ways as well.
Okay, lot to respond to, and some of what you're saying I actually do agree with. I, like you, felt, especially in 2016, that there was a very deliberate effort by the DNC to crown Hillary Clinton as the heir apparent to Barack Obama. And there was some fishy stuff that happened for sure. 2020, a little less. I feel a little less that's true. I do feel like the moderate vote really did coalesce around Joe Biden because he was the only candidate who won a state, right? He won South Carolina, I think it was, in 2020. And all of a sudden, the dominoes started falling. All the moderate Democrats, like the Pete Buttigieg's, like the Amy Klobuchar's, dropped out and endorsed him as the one to run against Bernie. I'm a big Bernie guy. I would have loved to see Bernie Sanders be the nominee and hopefully the president. But that's not how it played out. I also do think that Bernie's ideas are to the left. I agree with a ton of them, but the United States is not yet in a position where there's a critical mass that I think was ready for someone as populist on the left as Bernie. Anyway, that's not the point. I think what happened was Joe Biden said pretty early on after getting elected, I want to run again. I suspect that this thing that he has aspired to his whole career, right? He gets elected in 2020. And I think that a lot of Americans were under the impression that he was going to do a one term. He was kind of a transition president.
He did say that he was going to be before he actually took office.
He didn't actually say it explicitly.
I'm pretty sure he did.
No, he didn't. He said it implicitly. There's no video footage of Joe Biden saying, I will be a one-term president. He's never said that. But I think that from a lot of the things that he said, from the fact that he's an old guy, that he was framing himself as, I'm going to keep Trump out. And he did. He did that successfully in 2020. And I think that, for one thing, there was this big assumption that Trump might go away, right, after losing in 2020. That his popularity was, that his star was fading, that people like Ron DeSantis were the rising stars of the Republican Party, and it was time for the next generation. That's not, of course, how it happened. Donald Trump becomes the nominee again, or it's clear that he's going to be the nominee, I think, pretty early. And so I think Joe Biden's theory was, I'm the only one who can beat Donald Trump. Oh, that's cool. You see the thumbs up?
I did. It was kind of strange. I was wondering what that was.
Joe Biden's theory was, I'm the only one who can beat Donald Trump. I'm going to hang in there again, underestimating how much he had aged, how advanced he was as far as just his inability to put together coherent sentences in the way that he was in 2020, right? He was like, we never saw the Joe Biden of 2024 in 2020 because
he wasn't nearly as sharp as he was in 2016.
I agree. I would say that the 4 years as president have been a major strain on Biden, and that he has, very much advanced in his aging between 2020 and 2024. And we saw that very clearly in the debate. So I don't think it was this like nefarious thing where the Democrats were thinking like, oh, we're gonna unleash this plot to keep Joe Biden in. I think Joe Biden himself was probably the biggest factor, saying, I'm staying in. Donald Trump's going to be the guy. I'm going to be the guy to beat him. And as we saw, it was very difficult to convince Biden to drop out, right? It took fucking everybody, excuse me for the language.
But I don't care.
to come together and basically tell this guy, like, you got to get out. You're going to lose for sure. And only once the entire Democratic Party was against him did he relent. So in that sense, I actually don't think that it was quite as bad as that. And then to your point about actually choosing Kamala Harris, I agree. That wasn't super democratic. They could have done an open convention where they got all the people together. They got the Gavin Newsoms and the what's his name, Shapiro. And it's funny, I had all their names flowing through
Gretchen Whitmer, that kind of thing.
And put them all together in a convention. I think that would have been a high risk move that could have gone well, that could have gone poorly. I think that there was absolutely a time factor. Time is of the essence. Like, American elections last 2 years, and there was only 3-4 months left.
I know it's such a strange thing to us Canadians that elections last this long. I have an election coming up here in my home province in October, and signs went up today.
That's right. That's how it goes. Canadian federal elections are usually 45 days.
Yeah, so they usually start.
Like, look, we already know what's going to happen in the Canadian election, and we'll talk about that another time. But like,
we have a whole year to talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, no, it could be happening sooner than we think. But all to say that I think that now that the dust has settled, Kamala Harris is doing very well. She may, I think, most likely win. At this point, my money's on her to win. And I think that, yes, it was anti-democratic, but the Democratic Party did what they felt they had to do to win. And they chose a candidate. Biden chose a candidate who I think has evolved a lot since her 2019 run. I think that the 4 years that she spent as vice president have hardened her in a way that she was not ready for in 2019. And the last 2 months, month and a half, 2 months, have really demonstrated that. I think that she has made basically no mistakes. She had a strong debate performance, not the perfect debate performance, but a strong debate performance. She made Trump look like a fool. And so, this bet might just pay off. So there you go.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it might pay off. I just, as an idealist, I think it's pretty disgusting on their part. But that's just me. I'm not I at times can be a pragmatist, but typically I'm an idealist, and so when I see a party that talks about democracy as if it's this extremely vital thing, and then they go and they subvert it for several presidential campaigns in a row, I think that they're corrupt and need to be burned to the ground. I think the Republican Party also needs to be burned to the ground, but that in due time.
Let's be clear. Joe Biden, 20 minutes after announcing that he was dropping out, endorsed Kamala, right? That was a huge thing. And having the endorsement of the president in that moment was huge. So let's not pretend like there were some puppet masters behind the scenes pulling strings to make Kamala the heir apparent. She's the vice president, right? Like, yeah, I don't think it's
typically how it goes. I understand.
The whole point of the vice president existing, because they don't have a major role to play in the White House, is that they're ready to step up when the president is no longer able to serve. And that's exactly what happened. So I agree with you, and the idealist in me would have loved to see an open convention. But I also think that this was a necessary move, and again, it's working out. Also, and I know we're not supposed to be talking about the Republicans, they're way less democratic than the Democrats.
It's not even in their name. So, like, the fact that it's in their name is one of the things that frustrates me. If the Republicans had done this, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I mean, I wouldn't like it, but it's right in the name, Democratic Party.
Is to lower the vote as much as possible. Let's restrict voting, and that way we might have a shot, right? Because the more people who vote, and we know that the popular vote always goes to Democrats because they're actually talking about helping people, and Republicans across many of the red states are trying to take away the ability of especially colored people to vote, right? Because colored people, for the most part, I should say people of color, vote for
that's
Democrats.
a pretty risky term you're throwing around there, Nick. I disagree with that statement. I do think that they are trying to deal with voting rights issues in ways that you definitely are going to be disagree with. I don't think they're targeting minorities specifically. I think Trump is trying to court minorities, and he's done a better job than any Republican probably since Abraham Lincoln. Not that they could vote back then, but
Reagan would be the answer.
Fair enough. Until he went senile.
Should we talk a little about policy? We're talking about people, obviously, but let's talk a little bit more. And I think that a lot of Republicans will say, I don't really like Donald Trump, but I'm a fiscal conservative, and I support Trump because he has stronger policies than Harris, despite his
okay. Let's get one thing straight.
Let's talk about
policy does not matter with that man. I mean, he's flip-flopped on everything basically at this point. Policy does not matter. It's, as you said, it's a cult of personality. What he says one day, he flip-flopped on the salt tax, for crying out loud, most recently. So with him, it doesn't matter. He's the one who got Roe v. Wade overturned, but he's at the same time the most pro-choice Republican that there is. So. It doesn't really. Yeah, but I agree. We can talk about some policies. What would you like to talk about first?
Well, I actually feel like I've been speaking more, and I would like to invite you to maybe talk about policies you like, dislike, maybe just some of the big policies the Democrats are floating, or even like values. Like we can talk about policy, we can talk about values, often find. But at this point, you and I don't know if you still think this, but it sounds like you would still vote for Trump over Kamala if you could. That must mean that there are a lot of Democratic policies that you really dislike if you're willing to put White House.
Let's get this straight. I would not vote for either. I do have a preference for who wins, but as I said, an idealist, I am not going to vote for. I can't vote. I would not vote for him, and I would not vote for her. In my own province, the area that I am voting for, it doesn't even matter if I vote. It's gonna go conservative one way or another. It's a very, 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 very blue area. I know that's confusing for Americans because blue in Canada and the rest of the world means conservative. You guys are the ones that are backwards. So I'm just looking at some of the things on here. One of the things that I do like that they're going to be doing is tackling the housing crisis. The first-time home buyers, $25,000 is helpful, but at the same time, as someone who's fiscally conservative, I just see the government throwing money at a problem, which is what they seem to always do. And I don't like that, but I do like that it's at least something that is going to be helping people who need to get on the ladder. Because once you can get on that ladder, life becomes a lot better. And if you're renting your entire life, you will never feel like you're getting ahead. As someone who recently purchased their first home, it is such a difference to the way that you look at the world. You don't feel like you're constantly just feeding someone else's finances. So that is good, and I'm glad it's going. That is going, even though they're just throwing money at a problem, I'm glad it's going towards something that I find value in. Home ownership, I think, is one of the most important things that you can do. So get married,
totally.
Buy a house. That's my advice to you guys.
I
don't care if it's a man or a woman. Get married and buy a house.
I'm, living in Montreal, where it's not as bad as Toronto or Vancouver, but it's still very difficult to buy a home as a young person. I have a, decent but relatively modest salary, and I'm nowhere near home ownership. It feels super far away, and I appreciate that there's a first-time home buyer savings account that exists now, and that there are subsidies in Canada as well. So I support subsidies to help people get into the market, right? Because that's how you build wealth. Is ultimately the ability to purchase a home. That's the kind of clearest way to do it. So looking at the states, like where there is also a housing crisis, it's kind of everywhere. I love that Kamala's first kind of big policy that she came out with because obviously she's not inheriting Joe Biden's policies. She needs to start from scratch, and I think that a lot of people give her crap because like she doesn't have a full policy platform yet. It's like, no, she needs time, right, to develop her own policies.
Almost like she should have had 2 years to do it.
Well, you know, she's coming into the last minute here, so I think that the fact that she's trying to help people who need it, right? She's not trying to give tax cuts to the wealthy. She's trying to help young people get in. She's trying to help people who want to start a business with subsidies. So I believe that's the role of government, right? The role of government is to help people move forward with their lives. And, you know, call me a socialist if you will.
Socialist.
But the the market can't do that. The market's not going to create, the ability of young people to buy homes. Like, no one else is going to do it.
So here's where I'll disagree with you on that. I do think the market is able to do that as long as the policies of government allow that. When you have certain restrictions that happen mostly in big cities, you see restrictions on certain things that allow building to be more difficult, and therefore housing is less frequent. But one thing I will say, and this is going to be my part of my conservativeness coming out, is that I think there would be a lot less of a housing crisis if people actually got together with people when they're fairly young, not necessarily super young, but fairly young, started investing in each other and then saving up and purchasing a home together. If you think of all the people that are living single in an apartment and then instead of living with a married partner, that's like, it's not half the housing, of course, but you're going to be freeing up a lot of housing and a lot of apartments, and then that would make the price less high. It would either drop, or if that never happened, then it never would have shot up as much as it has. So
co-ops, or co-ops.
I'm completely fine with people in small groups choosing to get together and forming essentially communes. I don't have a problem with. I think on an extrememely small scale, communism does work. My family is communistic in that my son provides nothing, and yet we provide everything for him. It's a joke.
Rabbit hole there. It's true though. Communism does work on a small scale.
And in a microscopic scale.
Teeny tiny. It works in
that little
like
freeloader.
All the kind of zombie movies, right? The apocalypse. Whether it's what's the recent one with Pedro Pascal? Last of Us. That dope commune that they show up at. It's like,
well, that's the thing. What's the Dunbar's number, where like the number of people that you know? I think if you cut that number in half and you really, really get to know these people, I think that could work. But that's beyond what we're talking about. Let's see.
Healthcare in the debate.
Concepts of a plan.
Concepts of a plan. Kamala Harris is talking about, expanding Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, to help more people, especially people with pre-existing conditions, get affordable medication, right? And what's Trump's plan? He got no plan. I got concepts of a plan. What does that mean? It means nothing. And it's interesting because
best interpretation is that they are formulating ideas. Worst interpretation, he's just didn't have an answer. And I know which one you think it is.
Truth is that Republicans have given up on healthcare, right? They have never been able to come up with a better plan. They have tried to repeal Obamacare and failed. They have absolutely no plan moving forward if they were to take the presidency. And as a result, you can just see they've given up, right? They're going to try about healthcare as little as possible. Yeah. They want to talk about immigration. They want to talk about high prices. They want to talk about crime, and that's it, right? Because on basically all the other issues, abortion, for example, and a woman's right to choose, they're losing. On healthcare, they're losing. And so really this is an election where it's about who can talk about their issues the most.
And get the other person to talk about the same issues.
And not to keep bringing up the debate, but I do think it was an important moment. Kamala Harris was able to keep Trump basically completely away from his strongest points, right? Trump barely talked about the economy at all, right? Which is the number one issue that voters have in the United States. and that Republicans perceived to be better on the economy than Democrats.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you ask the average person, they would say that they were doing better under Donald Trump's presidency financially, at least. I'm going to go on to one thing about that. One of the ways that I think they have won, the Republicans, is that Kamala Harris has basically adopted their framework on the border. She hasn't copied his policies, but she has copied the framing of there's a crisis down there. Something needs to be done. And I do think that is one way that they have lost a debate on this. If you go and look at what her plan on this is, it's very different from what most of the Democrats were talking about in 2020. And anyone except Bernie Sanders in 2016 even. So that's one way that they've definitely lost, and I do appreciate, because the border is an issue down there when as many people are coming in illegally and you don't know who's coming in. They're coming in from many different countries, mostly military-aged young men, many Chinese men coming in, which is kind of strange considering how difficult it is to emigrate from China. You really need to have a solid border when you are living in a society that has such vastly different cultures than others. You look at Europe, the EU, they are all westernized countries, and so they can have a much greater free flow of people. That's become a much bigger problem ever since all of the Arabs have migrated up there.
They eating the dogs there too? Or is that just in the...
This is going to be really fucked up. I'm just going to say this. And I know this because my parents have said otherwise. And my parents had traveled to Europe many different times. It would probably be a good thing if they were. Because many European countries, like Italy specifically is one of the major ones, have massive problems with wild dogs. Just like homeless dogs that just...
Yeah, no, that makes sense, right?
It's free food. I know that's pretty fucked up of me to say, but
oh my god! And that the song that they made out of "They're Eating the Dogs" is actually #1 on the charts. Like, isn't that unbelievable?
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. But it's you have to admit, Nick, it's hella catchy.
Oh, it's fucking hilarious. I was watching it with a buddy, the debate, and I burst out laughing when he said that. I could not believe that he said that. Just so wild. So wild. Anyway, refocusing.
Yes, we're talking about the Democrats.
Well, exactly, and I think it's easy, and I think it's okay that we talk about the Republicans because, you know, one cannot exist without the other, right? It's Batman and Joker. And did anyone see Kieran's eyes brighten a little bit that the Batman mentioned? But maybe we can talk a little bit about Kamala herself.
Yeah, I would like to go through a few more of her policies on here because there's a few things that I want to... Some of them are fairly generic Democrat policies. like her stance on abortion is very standard Democrat. And while I have my problems with it overall, there's certain things that I am concerned about, but at the same time not... I am more in line with what they have been talking about than what the general Republican platform is on it. So I really don't have...
Can I just make my quick point on abortion?
Go ahead.
I just want to say, okay, it doesn't make any sense to me why Republicans want to remove a woman's right to choose. And here's why. I understand that you're against abortion. I understand that you think that your understanding of abortion is killing a child, right? Maybe this comes from religion or somewhere else. I don't know. But I can understand that from someone else's perspective, that abortion at any stage of a pregnancy is murder, right? And I think that a lot of people think that way.
Okay, so how could you think that it wouldn't matter? Like, why would you think that they wouldn't fight against that?
But here's my point, is that even if you are someone who believes that abortion is murder, you need to recognize that there are a lot of people in your country who do not think that, right? There are a lot of people lot of women who do not see abortion as murder, and who are going to seek an abortion whether it's legal or not, right? In extreme cases, for sure, but a lot of the time you are, not necessarily in some of those extreme cases, but there are a lot of super valid reasons for getting an abortion, right? And so these women are going to get them whether it's legal or not, right? And if it's illegal, it becomes way more dangerous for both for the woman, and making it harder for her to get that health care that she is going to seek out one way or another is just making everything worse, right? Making life harder for everyone. So it's just like, can we not accept that in the places where, people who don't want to have abortions, who want to carry a pregnancy to term, can do that, and a person who does not want to carry a pregnancy to term can also have the freedom to choose not to. Like, Elizabeth Warren had this great point where she said to this guy who was at one of her rallies, and she finds out that he's against gay marriage, right? And she goes, "You're against gay marriage? Cool, marry a woman." It's like,
okay, those are completely different things. So many of the things that you said.
If you're against something, then don't do it.
Okay,
but prove someone else's right to do that.
Okay, but you could make the same argument to be pro-slavery, and many people did. You don't want slavery, so you don't own slaves. And I'm not for that, but people made very similar arguments, and I don't think that's a good logic. If something is violating someone's fundamental rights, the right to life, the right to liberty, I don't think it matters whether if you think that's happening to someone, you should fight against it. And so I completely understand pro-life people's stance. I get why they think that it's murder, and if you do think that it is the murder of an unborn child, you should be fighting against it at all costs, because they're killing babies. Now, that's how they see it, and if you see that that's the case, wouldn't you want to stop the murder of babies? You're just gonna be like, okay, those people over there can do it. It's not a big deal. So I don't buy your argument.
You're not thrilled about it, but you understand that they're going to do it, whether you like it or not, right? Whether it's legal or not, whether you have made it as hard as possible to get an abortion, there's still a lot of people.
Some people will.
We're going to get abortions.
Some people will,
right?
But some people will decide to have the baby instead.
Some of them will have it instead when they are. When they are completely unable to care for that baby, and then that baby grows up in poverty, and then ends up potentially in prison, potentially committing crimes. There's a lot of super valid reasons why a woman who is not yet ready to bring a child into this world would seek out an abortion. Anyway, we don't need to be super into the abortion debate.
We can have a whole episode if you want. I'll just say that personally, I don't want to take that away. I like the system that we have here in Canada. I would like to know actually what your stance is. Are you more, or would you like Canada's laws to go more liberally in terms of abortions? Like, I'm pretty sure here it's 15 weeks. And then you're not allowed getting abortions after that, I think is what it is in Canada. Would you like to be farther up?
Yeah, I'm never totally sure what exactly the weeks translate to. Like, there was a point in the debate where Kamala was asked, are you for late-term abortions, like third trimester abortions? And there's just such an easy, obvious answer, which is no. And that's just ridiculous, right? And I think that oftentimes the right tries to paint the left as, they're for late-term abortions. Therefore, abortions after the baby's born. It's like, okay, well, A, that's not an abortion. And again, Donald Trump talked about that, right? He tried to make the left seem so extreme because therefore 8.5 month, 9-month abortions.
So I will say that unfortunately it does happen, and there are certain states where it has been legalized up to that point, and even not just for cases of the life of the mother, and it has happened. Unfortunately, It's pretty gross. In my opinion, they should just C-section that baby and then let that woman go live her life, have that baby put up for adoption. But it's not a common thing by any means. The vast majority of abortions take place a little far before that. Personally, I'm against the vast majority of abortions, but as a legal matter, I would not want to restrict women in that way. I know that when I had my son and when my wife was pregnant, that's when I felt like you feel their stomach. There's an infant inside of this person. It's growing. It's its own human life. And if I found out that, if she didn't tell me and she had got rid of a child that she didn't tell me about, I would be devastated, and I don't think I could ever forgive her for that. And while I may advocate against it, say I had a friend, and I'm not going to say who had a pregnancy scare recently with his girlfriend, and she feels that they're not in a position that would be great for it. I would advocate for him to step up and to have that baby. And now they're not in a position where they wouldn't be able to deal. People have much worse positions than him. He's got a good, solid, full-time job. He's a hardworking guy who could make some decent money. And I would try and advocate for them to have the baby, but I would never want to legally take away the ability to, and especially in cases of rape, incest, or life of the mother. Life of the mother should never be something that should never be on the table. If the mother's life is in danger, that takes priority, mostly because she could have subsequent children. You're saving one life, or saving, potentially 1 plus X.
Yeah. But fundamentally, for me, it's so simple, which is that women and couples, families are in a way better position to make decisions than any government or legal body, right? It's like you should have the right to have that conversation, make those choices for yourself, whatever you think is best, and be able to legally do that, right, one way or another. But in
Canada, we have certain laws around it, right? So there is a certain place where it comes to a point where we say, actually, no, this is actually wrong, and then the government will step in.
I think that's true, and I think that's that there are only very extreme cases. I think where it makes sense for the government to step in, but again, these are tiny fractions of what is the greater issue, which is, for me, frankly, that women have the right to choose. Let's move on.
Sure. You said you wanted to talk about Kamala herself as a person.
As a candidate, yeah.
As a candidate, I think she's been running a pretty good campaign. I've seen better campaigns. I also think that she's not running against a great candidate. If she was running against a better candidate, I think she would probably end up losing. She was never particularly popular up until she took over for Joe Biden, where she went from being the least popular vice president in modern history to being the second most popular person in the race, right behind her vice president candidate. So there's a big swing there, and I think that's personally, I think that's I don't think that's a grassroots thing. I think that was generated is not the right word. I can't think of what the right word would be, but I think it's partially artificial, and then partially people just jumping for joy that Joe Biden's no longer the president, or he's still the president. Sorry, no longer the candidate.
That she is reaping a lot of just this kind of pent up excitement that people had that was being released for no one, right? I think that you just had so many people in the electorate who were just, shoulders slumped, not excited, thinking about staying home as opposed to showing up for either of these candidates who are, both old men. And to have someone who is younger, right? She's 60, she's not young. But she's younger. She's of a different generation than both Trump and Biden. She's got, that's a different generation. She's got way more energy, more charisma. Her presence both in
I don't think she has more charisma than Donald Trump. Donald Trump exudes charisma, and in not necessarily good ways.
You're right. Donald Trump is a personality. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But I think that she is someone who gets people excited, who has, been very good on the trail. I think her performance at the debate was fantastic, not because she herself was able to express a ton of super clear policies, again, because it's very early. She's also very nervous. She hasn't been tested in the way that nominees would have been, having gone through the entire nomination process, right? Like, she didn't go through a primary in the way that every other presidential candidate has gone through. And so the fact that she was able to show up on that stage with as little debate experience as she's had, and had more people watch her than the Super Bowl, that debate was so incredibly popular. And what she was able to do was bait Trump and make Trump seem like a fool, and he just fell for it every single time.
She played him like a puppet. Yeah.
She mocked him for his rallies, which he fell for like so easily. She mocked him for the way that he's perceived by leaders and his love of tyrants. Like, I just think that she baited him over and over and over again, and it worked. So this theory that Joe Biden is the only one who can beat Trump is not valid. I don't think we understood Trump in 2016. I think that Hillary Clinton's theory of how to beat Donald Trump was the wrong one, and that's not a thought, that's a fact.
Clearly.
Because she lost. But Democrats have since then developed a new theory about Trump, and that is to goad him and to point out one of the 1,000 things that disqualifies him from being president. And I think that Kamala was able to point all those things out and make very, very strong attacks on Trump in the way that Biden was not, right? Trump has so much to attack, and Biden was able to attack none of it, right? And so Kamala is able to do that, and she's doing it very effectively. And I think that that's going to yield her the White House. And I gotta say, I'm pumped for the first woman president, right? It's about time. And I know that we shouldn't care, and meritocracy, yada yada yada. I think that having a woman president is something that progressive nations need to, and we haven't had one in Canada either. We haven't had a female prime minister except for Kim Campbell, very briefly.
Yeah, we talked about this last time, and I want to throw this in because I know we talked about this last time, and there's a certain way that representation matters, and I don't think in this instance her race matters at all. I do think that when it comes to representation, the only one that matters is the first. After that, you can always point back to that. You can say, if a little girl comes up and says, "I want to be president someday," you'll be able to point and say, "Yeah, you can do it. Look at this person's done it." So if a little young African American child, Asian child, whatever, says, "I want to be president of the United States," but you can always reference back to the first time that it wasn't just a white guy doing it. So after that, I really don't think it matters after the first. The first, I think, is a big milestone, and I think that it is important in a certain degree, but subsequent iterations, I don't think have any real relevance.
It's so interesting, though, because Kamala's campaign has really refrained from talking about her being the first woman president, right? And I think that's a lesson from Hillary Clinton's campaign, yes, who wouldn't stop talking about being the first woman president, right? And it was kind of like, I think that what a lot of people said was, so wait a second, we should elect you just because you're a woman and because it would be historic, and not because you're the right person for the job. That's how a lot of people saw it.
I agree. I love that she's done that, because she's taken the focus off of something that most people don't care about. Most people want your policies. Most people, even though they're not detailed on these things, they want substance. They might not delve into the substance, but they want to know that you have it. And if all you talk about is your identity, which unfortunately she does talk about, but not necessarily her, she refers to other aspects of her identity, growing up middle class, things like that, which is more important because I think class identity is more relevant.
Talks a lot more about class than she does about race or gender, right?
And I like that because as someone who I used to vote for the New Democratic Party here in Canada. Once things shifted to when they started talking more about race and gender, that really off-put me, because I don't think that those things really matter in the ways that class politics does, because there is a division. If I were to ask you who has more in common, the wealthy elite with each other, the multinational wealthy elite compared to the everyday worker, or say Barack Obama with a random African American man from, the poorest regions that there are. Like, the class thing matters so much more.
Yeah, and we've had this conversation a lot, and I totally hear you. I just think that it's important to acknowledge that race and class are deeply intertwined, right? Interwoven. And it's not as though you can just say there is no relevance. One does not have relevance to the other, because they do.
Correlations, for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not really surprising.
The last thing that I'll say about Kamala, which I think is a good thing, and I want to be clear, like, I don't think Kamala is the perfect candidate, and I'm probably further to the left than Kamala is. And you were talking about the border earlier. Like, you're right that the Democrats have had to pivot way to the right on the border, because that's where the country is, and a party is supposed to be a representation of the country. So totally makes sense that they've pivoted there. But for me, I'm a believer in much more core solutions to why so many people are fleeing South American and Central American countries in the first place. It takes a long time to solve. I get that, but villainizing him, absolutely the wrong way to go in my view. But this is all to say that I think Kamala has done something that Joe Biden was fundamentally unable to do. Joe Biden made Trump bigger, right? Joe Biden's whole campaign was Donald Trump is an existential threat. He's a threat to democracy. It's the end of America. If you elect him, you must elect me. I'm not perfect, but I'm not Donald Trump. Please, please, please elect me. And Kamala Harris's campaign, and this is what Walls is, Donald Trump's weird.
Yeah, and I think that's a great tactic. They haven't completely gotten rid of the other side of that. They still are doing it in smaller amounts, for sure. They haven't made it the focal point of the campaign. And I think that's smart. I think it's definitely better and more uniting. I wish they would cut it out completely, because let's face it, it's not going to be the end of the country. If it is the end of the country, the United States was clearly rotten already. Which I actually do believe that the United States is rotting, but has nothing to do with Donald Trump. He's just a portion of it. I think the institutions in general are, the intelligence agencies and all of that. I think it's both parties together are what's wrong with the country. And if the United States devolves into authoritarianism, which people on the left and on the right seem to think that it is, left-wing people seem to think that Donald Trump's a fascist, and right-wing people seem to think that Kamala Harris is a communist. And if they think that the country is going to devolve into authoritarianism because of one or two candidates in a row getting elected, then if that does happen, that's because of a deep rot that has been stewing for decades. It has nothing to do with this one guy came in 2016 and that's when things went bad.
So not true. That is so not true, Kieran.
What?
Here, oh my God, he's the only president ever who's fought the outcome of an election.
Okay, Nick, you are missing the major aspects of how they are transferring more and more power to the Oval Office. Congress is supposed to dictate the vast majority of what goes on inside the country, and they are giving the administrative state and they are giving the Oval Office more power, and then at the same time they're using three-letter agencies and the security state to strip people of their rights in ways that has been going on for generations at this point. It is not just him. He is a virus. He has escalated it. I will not
Well,
disagree that he has
no one else has
escalated.
done
Sure, yes, I don't disagree with that. Although denial of elections has been happening for a long time. I think it was not John Kerry. Who was it?
Are you talking about,
What?
are you talking about Bush v. Gore in 2000?
Yeah, who they claim that Bush stole the election by recounting certain counties in Florida. So election denial is
And
a major
however-
thing that's been going on. Hillary Clinton denied that Donald Trump fairly won the 2016 election, citing Russian interference, which, if you go and look, there was interference in many different ways. The Russian collusion hoax.
When she said that there were nefarious.
She called him an illegitimate president, and if you are an illegitimate president, it means that you won under ways that were not.
The Russia blown, no doubt about it. The Russia thing was overblown. But to compare that to Donald Trump not surrendering, to not saying that Joe Biden won the election in 2020, claiming that he won and sowing doubt among most of the Republican Party about that the functioning of their democratic system is way beyond anything else we've ever seen.
Look,
By-
first of all, I don't think it's most of the Republican Party. I think they just went along with him because they're just going along with him because of who he is. He's the king, right? So, but this is a rot that has been going on for a long time. The so-called deep state is real. You can tell by the fact that the current president is a doddering old man who doesn't work at all. He just goes on vacation, while the vice president is out campaigning. So who's running the country? The administrative state. So they're taking people's rights in many different ways. You might disagree that they have, but I'll just tell you that they have literally tortured people who were arrested from January 6th. And if you don't believe me, they had people in solitary confinement for months. And that is something that is considered a form of torture by the UN. So they are all disgusting, vile people, and none of them should be anywhere near the throne of power. Not Kamala, not Tim Walz, not JD, not Donald Trump. And yes, he might be the one who is accelerating it more than other people. But if the country falls to authoritarianism, it is not his fault. It is something deeper that was escalated.
And there's a lot to get into there, and we can talk about all the Jordan Peterson that you've been consuming.
Nothing
and
to do with Jordan Peterson. He never talks about this stuff. He's too busy talking about religion these days.
What's his name? Ben Shapiro, and all these guys. Anyway, listen. I think that's a good place to wrap. We've been going for a while now.
58 minutes. Almost
Yeah,
exactly.
that's definitely good.
Let's wrap up with a bit more positive. Because I don't want to end on a negative note. I don't want to end on me ranting. It makes me feel kind of icky inside. I will just say that I think that things are turning towards the better. I am an optimist, and I think that things will get better as long as people are able to acknowledge the rot in the system and work towards eliminating it. And I think that's an important thing for people to do.
What I would say, and this is just to kind of refocus on the point of this discussion, which is the Democratic Party, is that say what you will, and yes, the Democratic Party is deeply flawed, and you're talking about the system as a whole being deeply flawed, and in many ways you're right. But when you watch Kamala Harris and many of the prominent Democrats take the stage at the Democratic National Convention, I almost said Democratic Republic National Convention.
Well, it is a Democratic Republic.
DNC. What you saw was a lot of people talking about hope, talking about community, talking about joy, talking about helping your neighbors, about being a good person. Those are values that I think everyone should aspire towards. And again, say what you will, but there's only one party that's talking about joy and hope and community, and that's the Democratic Party. And when I watch people like Kamala and Obama Michelle speak, it actually makes me feel hopeful, right? And nothing anyone can say can take that away. And I just feel as though the Democrats have found their footing again. I'm excited. I really hope Kamala wins. I really hope that she's a good president. I think she will be, and I think that's in large part because of the values that she espouses, which are ones that I align with. So, yeah, go Kamala.
You can say all you want. Actions speak louder than words, and I hope that you're correct. I would rather be wrong about the things that I believe, because the things that I believe with regards to this is no outcome of this election is a positive one in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I think that we can live our lives thinking everything is, bad and terrible, or we can, as you say, try to be optimistic and just do our part, right? We're not going to fix the system. No one person is going to do that, but I think that if we aspire to those ideals that Kamala was talking about, we can make the world a little bit better.
Agreed. And one thing I'm kind of sad we never ended up touching on is international stuff, but I'm sure that's not a big deal. Really, in the end, neither of the parties are really that different when it comes to dealing with dealing with the wars that are going on. So I'll just say,
Hezbollah stuff, this is probably, but this is we may be seeing the beginning of a much greater Middle Eastern war.
Yeah, and if it happens before November, it will likely cost the Democrats the election. So I would say thanks for stopping by, everyone. Agree to disagree with you on many things, Nicholas. I still love you. Goodbye, everybody.
Peace.